I'm Somava Saha. I lead well-being and equity in the world and the Well-being in the Nation Network. This work on how we lean into these moments of crisis to chart a path toward equitable resilience and renewal is one that is near and dear to my heart because crises creates an opportunity to change the system. And if we don't apply an equity first approach to that, we are very likely to replicate or even deepen inequities. Even with all of the best values in the world, the absence of balancing systems that would actually account for the inequity leads to widening of disparities. And that has been historically true and literally redlined in the context of the COVID pandemic. Early on in the pandemic, we predicted that the places that have inequities would have a worsening COVID outbreak. And of course, we saw that the places where there was high social vulnerability were in fact often the places with the greatest number of COVID deaths and COVID cases. And that was completely predictable based on maps drawn in 2016 by the CDC, and you can tie that into the safety of the air that we breathe, whether the built environment and access to food had led people to premature chronic illness, to access to water and sanitation, things like that. But it was also a place where we saw that our legacies of structural racism and inequities, our legacy of residential segregation, were exactly the same places where we saw Black families get COVID far more and have far less infrastructure and resources to be able to mediate a response. Not to mention the fact that those who have privilege are able to and have the system set up to take advantage of grants and resources. We're asking people to understand and acknowledge that we have a problem without drowning in the shame of that. Use it as an opportunity to learn and use our power and privilege to renew our social contract with one another. To use where the current system failed as an opportunity to build the more resilient system that won't fail the next year's COVID outbreak or next climate equity issues that we're already beginning to see, to any number of other threats that we already experience every day. But you can't get out of a crisis with a crisis response. You get out of a crisis by building resilience and paths to renewal so that you're no longer in a zone of crisis. As federal dollars are going out, or as state or community dollars are going out, if you can make sure that a proportionate amount, even, and ideally a disproportionate amount, goes to those communities that are most affected, not just in a short-term response, but in mechanisms that build longer-term resilience and trusts the ability of those communities to lead. That seems pretty simple if you think about it, but that requires us to trust people who are poor and the communities who are poor and reframe them as resourceful, as asset-based, as creative and resilient. And I think that we have to stop fixing communities and instead start trusting and unleashing communities. There's a different set of processes that enables that, where we don't have to be the saviors. We actually have to get out of the way. We have to help make sure they get the resources, to ask them, what could you imagine? How can we support you in what we imagine? And then what you end up with is a fundamentally more effective response in the short term, and a more restorative civic infrastructure in the long run. We don't have to keep paying for emergency room visits and jail bookings and emergency rescue social services and shelters, because we can actually create a community that grows youth who are leaders in their community, that grows families that are able to be there for one another and to support the vital conditions that all of us need to thrive, because we trust people. These are all solvable. They're eminently solvable issues if we have the courage to be smart and strategic and thoughtful. I think it's hard for groups of stewards to create something that's truly different if they start from the same structures and culture and place. So I think we have to rethink different ways of providing communities with the information and data they need to make good stewardship decisions, and thinking fundamentally differently about whose voice and power and leadership and ideas are even being put forward and whose culture is leading that stewardship conversation. And I think people actually on both sides are suffering today because we haven't chosen to do that. And I hope that we can lean into this moment to bring people back together again.